The morning sun cast long shadows across the marble floors of the Riverside County Family Courthouse as Detective Sarah Chun adjusted her badge and checked her watch. Tuesday, July 18th, 2023, a date that would forever change how the American justice system viewed its youngest witnesses. She had no idea that within hours, her routine domestic violence case would become national news, sparking a revolution in courtroom procedures across the country. Judge Patricia Williams entered courtroom 4B at exactly 9:15 a.m., her black robes billowing behind her as she surveyed the unusually tense atmosphere. In her 23 years on the bench, she had presided over thousands of family court cases. Bitter custody disputes, heart-wrenching abuse allegations, and devastating divorces. But something about People versus David Martinez felt different from the moment she opened the case file 3 weeks ago. The defendant, David Martinez, sat rigid at the defense table, his expensive navy suit unable to mask the desperation in his dark eyes. His hands trembled slightly as he avoided looking toward the gallery where his estranged wife Rosa sat clutching a tissue box. Between them stretched 2 years of escalating arguments, police calls, and protective orders that had torn their family apart like tissue paper in a hurricane. Defense attorney Robert Hayes, a silver-haired veteran with a reputation for winning impossible cases, shuffled through his papers with uncharacteristic nervousness. Across the aisle, Prosecutor Jennifer Kim arranged her evidence files with military precision, her jaw set with determination. This wasn't just another domestic violence case to her. It was personal. Kim had grown up listening to her own mother's muffled sobs through bedroom walls, had hidden in closets while her father's voice thundered through their small apartment. The courtroom's heavy wooden doors creaked open, and a collective intake of breath echoed through the space. Rosa Martinez entered, her hand gently guiding the smallest figure anyone present had ever seen called to testify. 3-year-old Emma Martinez looked impossibly tiny in her yellow sundress decorated with butterflies, her dark hair pulled into 2 perfect pigtails secured with bright red ribbons that matched her small Mary Jane shoes. Emma's enormous brown eyes, so much like her father's, swept across the intimidating room with a mixture of curiosity and terror. The high ceilings seemed to stretch endlessly above her, the formal portraits of stern-faced judges staring down like disapproving giants. She pressed her stuffed rabbit, Mr. Whiskers, closer to her chest, the toy's soft pink fur, worn smooth from countless nights of comfort during the family's tumultuous separation. "Your Honor," Prosecutor Kim began, her voice steady despite the unprecedented nature of what she was about to request. "The state calls Emma Martinez to the stand." A murmur rippled through the packed gallery. Reporters from 3 local news stations leaned forward in their seats, pens poised. Court employees who had worked these halls for decades found excuses to linger near the doors. They had never witnessed a witness so young, so vulnerable, stepping into the harsh spotlight of legal proceedings. Judge Williams studied the small girl with careful consideration. Emma had turned 3 just 2 months earlier, barely old enough to speak in complete sentences. Yet she might hold the key to justice in a case that had already seen 2 hung juries due to lack of concrete evidence. The child's preschool teacher, Mrs. Rodriguez, had been the one to report Emma's disturbing artwork, crayon drawings of stick figures with angry red scribbles for faces, accompanied by the child's innocent explanation of Daddy's monster times. Defense attorney Hayes immediately stood, his voice booming across the courtroom. "Your Honor, I object to this entire proceeding. The witness is clearly too young to understand the nature of oath-taking, lacks the cognitive development for reliable testimony, and subjecting a child of this age to cross-examination borders on abuse itself." Kim fired back without hesitation. "Your Honor, the Supreme Court established in Wheeler versus United States that no person is disqualified as a witness based on age alone. If this child possesses sufficient intelligence to observe events and can communicate her observations, her testimony is admissible. As the attorneys debated legal precedents and psychological evaluations, Emma remained frozen beside her mother's chair, overwhelmed by the adult voices rising around her like competing thunderstorms. Her bottom lip began to quiver, and she buried her face against Rose's leg, seeking refuge from the intimidating chaos. Judge Williams raised her hand for silence, her maternal instincts overriding legal procedures. Counselors approached the bench. The attorneys huddled in whispered conference, while Emma peeked out from behind her mother's protection, watching the mysterious adult ritual with wide eyes. "This child has already endured trauma," Judge Williams whispered firmly to both legal teams. "If we proceed, it will be with extreme care for her psychological well-being. One more outburst, one moment of distress, and I'm terminating this testimony immediately." Detective Chun, who had been quietly observing from the back of the courtroom, suddenly stepped forward. She had worked domestic violence cases for 8 years, had seen children Emma's age struggle with trauma that no young mind should ever have to process. But she had also witnessed something remarkable during her recent training with the courthouse's new victim assistance program. "Your Honor," Chun's clear voice cut through the tension, "may I make a suggestion that might help facilitate this testimony while protecting the witness?" All eyes turned to the detective, a respected veteran whose case clearance rate spoke volumes about her dedication to justice. Judge Williams nodded, curious about what solution this experienced officer might propose. Chun took a deep breath, knowing she was about to suggest something unprecedented in this courthouse's long history. "Your Honor, I'd like permission to introduce my partner to help comfort the witness during her testimony." The courtroom buzzed with confusion. Hayes looked puzzled. Kim raised an eyebrow, and even Judge Williams seemed uncertain. "Detective Chun," the judge said slowly, "are you referring to your police partner? I'm not sure how another officer would help in this situation." Chun smiled for the first time that morning, her hand moving to the special leash clipped to her duty belt. "Not exactly, Your Honor. My partner has 4 legs, extensive training in trauma response, and a remarkable gift for helping children find their voice when they need it most." The courtroom held its collective breath as Detective Chun walked toward the doors, everyone wondering what kind of partner could possibly help a terrified 3-year-old navigate the complexities of testimony that could determine her family's future. Outside in the hallway, a gentle giant waited patiently, unaware that he was about to make legal history and change one little girl's life forever. Emma lifted her head slightly, sensing something different in the air, her natural curiosity beginning to overcome her fear. Whatever was coming next, it would either be the breakthrough they desperately needed, or the moment this unprecedented case would fall apart completely. The fate of the Martinez family, and the future of how America's courts handle their youngest witnesses, hung in the balance of whatever Detective Chun was about to reveal. The heavy courtroom doors swung open with a soft whoosh, and Detective Sarah Chun stepped inside, her confident stride accompanied by the gentle click of claws against polished marble. Behind her walked the most magnificent German shepherd anyone in courtroom 4B had ever seen. Officer Bruno moved with the practiced grace of a professional, his thick coat gleaming under the fluorescent lights, his intelligent amber eyes scanning the room with calm assessment. Emma's transformation was instantaneous and magical. The terrified little girl who had been hiding behind her mother's legs suddenly straightened up, her tear-stained face lighting up like sunrise breaking through storm clouds. "Doggy," she squealed, her high-pitched voice cutting through the formal atmosphere like a bell of pure joy. The sound echoed off the high ceiling, causing even the most hardened court personnel to smile involuntarily. Bruno wore especially Designed courthouse vest of deep blue fabric with bold white lettering. Comfort animal. Do not pet. Working dog. But Emma couldn't read yet, and all she saw was the most beautiful, gentle giant she had ever encountered. Her small hands released Mr. Whiskers, letting the stuffed rabbit fall forgotten to the floor as she took tentative steps toward this unexpected visitor. Judge Williams had seen many unusual situations during her judicial career, but nothing quite like this. She watched in fascination as the intimidating courtroom seemed to transform around this four-legged presence. The tension that had been thick as fog just moments before began to dissipate like morning mist. Detective Chun had trained with Bruno for 2 years through the innovative Courthouse Comfort Animals program, a pilot initiative funded by a federal grant aimed at making the justice system more trauma-informed. Bruno wasn't just any police dog. He was specifically selected and trained for his exceptional temperament with children and victims of violent crimes. His certification required 18 months of specialized training in non-reactive behavior, stress recognition, and comfort positioning. Your Honor, Detective Chun addressed the bench with professional formality, though her voice carried warmth as she watched Emma's reaction. May I present Officer Bruno of the Riverside County Sheriff's Department Victim Services Division. He's a certified therapy animal with 4 years of courthouse experience and specialized training in child witness support. Defense attorney has shot to his feet like a rocket, his silver hair disheveled from running anxious fingers through it. Your Honor, this is highly irregular. There's no precedent for introducing animals into testimony proceedings. This could be seen as influencing the witness, creating undue emotional manipulation, or objection, Your Honor. Prosecutor Kim interrupted sharply. The defense is arguing legal points, not in evidence. Officer Bruno is a trained professional with documented credentials, and his presence is intended solely for witness comfort, which falls well within established victim services protocols. As the attorneys sparred over legal precedents, something beautiful was happening at floor level. Emma had crept closer to Bruno, drawn by an invisible magnetic force that only exists between children and animals. Bruno, sensing her approach, slowly lowered his massive frame to the ground, making himself less intimidating. His tail gave a gentle wag, not the excited thrashing of an ordinary pet, but the controlled, measured movement of a professional who understood his role. Hi, Poppy, Emma whispered, her voice barely audible but carrying clearly in the hushed courtroom. What's your name? Are you here for the scary talking to? Bruno's response was perfect. He remained completely still, allowing Emma to approach at her own pace while his calm presence radiated safety. His years of training showed in every micro-movement, from the way he kept his head lowered to appear less imposing to the patient manner in which he waited for Emma to initiate contact. Judge Williams studied the scene with the analytical eye of someone who had spent decades reading human behavior. Emma's entire body language had changed. The rigid fear that had held her like a statue was melting away, replaced by natural curiosity and wonder. Her breathing had visibly relaxed, and the death grip she had maintained on her mother's hand had loosened. Rosa Martinez watched through tears as her daughter experienced her first moment of peace in months. Emma had been having nightmares since the incident, waking up screaming about monsters and hiding under her bed during thunderstorms. Sleep had become elusive, meals had turned into negotiations, and the vibrant, chatty little girl Rosa remembered seemed lost in a maze of trauma and fear. But now, crouched beside this gentle giant, Emma looked like herself again. Your Honor. Detective Chun continued her explanation, while keeping one eye on the developing bond between child and dog. Bruno has assisted in over 200 cases involving child witnesses. His presence has been documented to reduce stress markers by up to 60% and significantly improve testimony clarity. He never interferes with legal proceedings. He simply provides emotional support through his calming presence. Court. Reporter Margaret Santos, a 30-year veteran who had transcribed everything from murder trials to custody hearings, found herself pausing in her work to watch the extraordinary scene. She had witnessed countless child witnesses over the decades, most of them terrified into silence, others coached to the point of artificiality. But she had never seen a child transformed so completely from fear to curiosity in the span of mere minutes. Emma was now sitting cross-legged on the carpet, just 2 feet from Bruno, studying his face with intense concentration. "You have really pretty eyes," she told him seriously. "They're like the shiny rocks Mommy showed me at the beach. Are you a magic doggy? Because I think you might be magic." Bruno's response was to shift slightly closer, positioning himself so that Emma could reach out and touch his fur if she chose. His training had taught him to read body language with extraordinary precision, and he could sense that this small human was ready for the next step in building trust. Judge Williams made her decision with the wisdom that comes from years of putting children's welfare above legal technicalities. "Mr. Hayes, while your concerns are noted for the record, I'm going to allow Officer Bruno to remain in the courtroom. However, I want to establish clear ground rules. The animal will position himself near the witness stand purely for comfort, will not interact with testimony procedures, and if at any point his presence appears to be influencing testimony content, he will be immediately removed." The decision sent ripples of excitement through the gallery. This was unprecedented territory. A therapy dog officially sanctioned to provide support during child testimony in a major domestic violence case. Several reporters quietly activated their phones to alert their newsrooms that something historic was happening in courtroom. 4B Emma looked up from her intense study of Bruno's face, finally noticing all the adults watching her. But instead of retreating into fear as she had earlier, she seemed to draw confidence from her newfound furry ally. "Bruno," she announced with the matter-of-fact tone only 3-year-olds can master, "I think these people want to hear our story. Should we tell them about the scary night?" The courtroom held its collective breath, realizing that they were about to witness something extraordinary. The power of unconditional animal companionship to unlock a child's voice when human connections had failed. Bruno simply looked at Emma with those steady amber eyes, and somehow that was enough. She was ready to speak. Emma settled herself on the carpet beside Bruno with the natural grace of a child who had found her safe harbor in a storm. Her small fingers tentatively reached out to touch the German shepherd's thick fur, and when he remained perfectly still, allowing her gentle exploration, she smiled for the first time since entering the courtroom. It was a smile that broke hearts and mended them simultaneously. The innocent joy of a 3-year-old discovering that not all big things in her world were scary. "Bruno," she began in her high, clear voice that carried across the silent courtroom like a bell, "do you know about monster nights?" Her tone was conversational, as if she were sharing secrets with her best friend, rather than testifying in a legal proceeding that would determine her family's future. That's when Daddy gets really, really loud and changes into something scary. Judge Williams leaned forward slightly, her experienced ear catching the significance of Emma's word choice. In her decades on the bench, she had learned that children often used metaphors and fantasy language to process trauma that was too overwhelming for their developing minds to comprehend literally. The monster reference wasn't just childhood imagination, it was a coping mechanism. Emma's tiny fingers began absently braiding sections of Bruno's fur as she continued, the repetitive motion seeming to calm her nerves. "I hide it in my closet with Mr. Bunny, and we heard crash, like when lightning hits the ground, but it was inside our house." Her voice dropped to a whisper. "And then Mommy said, 'Please stop, David, please.' But her voice was all wobbly like, 'When? I cry really hard.' Rosa Martinez gripped the wooden pew so tightly, her knuckles turned white. Hearing her daughter's innocent recounting of that terrible February night felt like reliving the nightmare all over again. She remembered Emma's small voice calling from her bedroom. "Mommy, why is Daddy using his thunder voice?" Rosa had tried so hard to shield Emma from the worst of David's explosive rage, but apparently nothing could protect a child from the sounds of violence echoing through thin apartment walls. Detective Chun watched Emma's body language with professional attention, noting how the child's stress markers, rapid breathing, fidgeting, avoiding eye contact, had virtually disappeared once she began speaking to Bruno. The therapy dog remained perfectly positioned, close enough to provide comfort, but not so close as to distract from testimony. His calm presence was like an anchor, keeping Emma grounded when the memories threatened to sweep her away. Then Daddy used his scary monster voice, not his nice daddy voice that reads bedtime stories. Emma continued, her 3-year-old vocabulary struggling to articulate concepts that many adults couldn't fully process. He said bad words that make the air feel heavy and scary. Words that made Mommy cry the big crying, not the little crying like when she watches sad movies. Court reporter Margaret Santos found herself blinking back tears as her fingers captured every word. In 30 years of transcribing testimony, she had heard every conceivable form of human tragedy, but there was something uniquely devastating about trauma, filtered through such innocent perception. Emma wasn't describing domestic violence. She was describing the night her safe world shattered, told in the language of a child who still believed in monsters under the bed. Prosecutor Kim felt her heart rate accelerate. Emma's testimony began corroborating the physical evidence collected that night. The crash, Emma described, matched the broken lamp and overturned coffee table investigators had photographed. The timeline Emma was innocently revealing aligned perfectly with the 911 call Rosa had managed to make before David destroyed her phone. Mommy had red stuff on her face, like when I fall down and scrape my knee, but way more red, Emma said matter-of-factly. Her child's understanding of blood limited to her own minor injuries. She looked directly into Bruno's patient amber eyes. It was on her forehead and coming from her nose, and some got on her pretty white shirt. I wanted to give her a Band-Aid like she gives me, but I was too scared to come out of my hiding spot. David Martinez sat frozen at the defense table, his face drained of all color. His attorney, Robert Hayes, had advised him to maintain composure regardless of testimony, but nothing could have prepared him for hearing his violence described through his daughter's eyes. The clinical language of police reports and medical examinations had somehow felt distant, impersonal. But Emma's innocent recounting made it impossible to hide behind legal technicalities or justifications. Emma shifted position slightly now, sitting cross-legged like she was at story time in preschool, one small hand resting on Bruno's back, as if drawing strength from his steady presence. "Bruno, do you think monsters are real?" Because that night, I was really sure Daddy turned into one. His face got all twisted up like the scary pictures in my storybook, and his voice got deep and growly. The courtroom remained absolutely silent, except for the soft whir of the air conditioning and the occasional shuffle of papers. Every adult present was transfixed by this tiny witness, who was unknowingly delivering the most compelling testimony any of them had ever heard. After the crashing and the yelling, everything got really quiet, Emma continued, her voice dropping to barely above a whisper. I waited and waited in my closet, counting to 10 like teacher showed us when we're scared. But I had to count to 10 lots and lots of times. Then I heard Mommy making little hurt sounds, like when Mr. Whiskers squeaks when I squeeze in too tight. Detective Chun made subtle notes on her pad, recognizing that Emma's timeline was providing crucial details about the aftermath of the assault. The little hurt sounds likely corresponded to Rosa's documented injuries, a concussion, fractured nose, and bruised ribs that had made breathing painful for weeks. Emma looked up from Bruno's fur, her large brown eyes scanning the adult faces watching her with rapt attention. For a moment, she seemed to remember where she was, and a flicker of uncertainty crossed her features. But then Bruno shifted slightly, moving his massive head to rest it gently near her lap, and her confidence returned. "Do you want to hear the scariest part, Bruno?" she asked, her voice taking on the hushed tone children use when sharing their deepest secrets. The courtroom leaned forward collectively, everyone sensing that the most crucial revelation was yet to come. Bruno's eyes never left Emma's face, his steady gaze providing the silent permission she needed to continue. What came next would shatter any remaining doubt about what happened that February night, delivered with the devastating honesty that only a child could provide. Emma leaned closer to Bruno, her small face serious as she prepared to share her deepest secret. The therapy dog seemed to sense the weight of what was coming, his amber eyes never wavering from her face, providing the unwavering attention that no adult in her short life had ever given her during her moments of greatest fear. The courtroom held its collective breath, sensing that whatever came next would be the moment that changed everything. "Bruno," Emma whispered, her tiny voice somehow carrying across the silent room with crystal clarity. "Can I tell you the really, really scary part? The part that makes my tummy feel all twisty when I think about it?" She paused, waiting as if Bruno might actually respond, and in that moment of silence, even the veteran court reporter felt her hands trembling slightly over her keyboard. Judge Patricia Williams had presided over thousands of cases involving child witnesses, but she had never seen a child so young speak with such devastating honesty. Emma's innocence was both her greatest vulnerability and her most powerful weapon. She couldn't lie, couldn't manipulate, couldn't shade the truth to protect anyone's feelings. She could only speak what she had seen and felt, and that pure honesty was more compelling than any legal argument. That night, after all the loud, scary sounds stopped, Emma continued, absently stroking Bruno's thick fur in a rhythmic motion that seemed to calm her nerves. "I finally got brave enough to peek out of my closet. Mr. Bunny was shaking. I think he was scared too. And I saw something that made my heart beat really, really fast." Rosa Martinez closed her eyes, knowing what was coming. She had hoped, prayed, that Emma had stayed hidden during the worst moments, that somehow her baby girl had been spared from witnessing the full horror of that night. But as Emma's words unfolded, Rosa realized that her daughter had seen everything, every moment of violence, every instant of her mother's terror. Daddy was standing over Mommy, and his hands were ... Emma paused, her 3-year-old vocabulary struggling to find words for what she had witnessed. "His hands were like this," she demonstrated, curling her tiny fingers into fists, "and they were shaking like when I get really, really mad at my toys. But these were big person mad hands, and they looked scary." Detective Sarah Chon felt her stomach clench as she recognized the significance of Emma's description. The child was describing the classic posture of an abuser in the aftermath of violence, the clenched fists, the aggressive stance over a fallen victim. This wasn't speculation or interpretation. This was eyewitness testimony from someone too young to understand its legal implications. Emma's next words sent shockwaves through the courtroom that would reverberate far beyond these walls. Looking directly into Bruno's patient eyes, she asked in her innocent, sing-song voice, "Bruno, why do daddies hurt mummies? My teacher, Mrs. Rodriguez, says hitting is wrong always, but daddy hit mommy lots and lots." The silence that followed was deafening. Even the air conditioning seemed to pause, as if the entire building was holding its breath. Defense attorney Robert Hayes felt his carefully constructed case crumbling around him like a house of cards. In a hurricane, how do you cross-examine pure innocence? How do you challenge the testimony of a child who doesn't even understand that she's destroying her father's defense? Emma tilted her small head to one side, considering her next words. With the careful deliberation of someone much older. I told Daddy no hitting. Just like teacher taught us in circle time. We learned that hitting hurts people's feelings and their bodies too. But when I said it, Daddy looked at me with his monster face and said ... She paused, her voice dropping to barely above a whisper, forcing everyone in the courtroom to strain forward to catch her words. He said little girls should be quiet and not talk about grown-up things. But Bruno, she looked directly into the dog's eyes with devastating honesty. If I stayed quiet like Daddy said, who would help Mommy? She was bleeding like when I cut my finger on the broken toy, but way bigger bleeding. Prosecutor Jennifer. Kim felt tears spring to her eyes despite her professional training. This wasn't just testimony anymore. It was a child's desperate attempt to understand why the most important person in her world had become a source of terror instead of protection. Emma's question hung in the air like an indictment of every adult who had failed to shield her from this trauma. David Martinez began to shake visibly at the defense table, his hands gripping the edge so tightly that his knuckles turned white. His daughter's words were hitting him like physical blows, each innocent observation stripping away another layer of the denial he had built around his actions. The clinical language of assault charges had allowed him to maintain emotional distance, but Emma's childlike honesty made hiding impossible. Bruno, I tried to be brave like the princess in my favorite book, Emma continued, her small fingers now braiding sections of the dog's fur with nervous energy. I wanted to help Mommy, but I was too little and too scared. So I did the only thing I could think of. I whispered really quietly, please stop hurting my Mommy. But I don't think Daddy heard me because the monster was being too loud. Court reporter Margaret Santos had to pause in her transcription. Her 30 years of professional composure finally cracking under the weight of this child's heartbreaking honesty. She had recorded confessions from hardened criminals, testimonies from trauma victims, and heart-wrenching custody disputes, but nothing had prepared her for the devastating simplicity of Emma's account. Emma suddenly looked up from Bruno's fur, her large brown eyes scanning the faces of all the adults watching her with such intense attention. For a moment, confusion flickered across her features, as if she was just remembering that this wasn't a private conversation with her furry friend, but a room full of strangers hanging on her every word. Do you think Daddy forgot how to use gentle touches? She asked Bruno with heartbreaking hope in her voice. Maybe someone needs to remind him? Because before the monster night started, Daddy used to give the best hugs and read me stories with funny voices. I miss that Daddy. Do you think the nice Daddy is still in there somewhere? Just lost? The question hit David Martinez like a physical blow. His daughter's unconditional love, her childlike faith that the father she remembered could somehow return, shattered the last of his emotional defenses. She wasn't just describing his crimes. She was mourning the loss of the man he used to be, the father she desperately wanted back. Emma's final observation would prove to be the most devastating of all. Still speaking directly to Bruno, as if he were her confessor, her therapist, her best friend, she said in a voice filled with wisdom far beyond her years, Bruno, I think grown-ups make things too complicated. It's really simple. If someone you love is hurting, you help them. If someone is being mean, you tell them to stop. And if you're the one being mean, you say sorry and try to be better. The courtroom sat in stunned silence, realizing that a 3-year-old had just delivered the most profound statement about justice, accountability, and redemption that any of them had ever heard. In her innocent wisdom, Emma had cut through all the legal complexity to reveal the simple truth at the heart of domestic violence. It was about choice, responsibility, and the courage to do what's right. What happened next would prove that sometimes the smallest voices carry the greatest power to change hearts, minds, and the very foundations of justice itself. The silence following Emma's innocent wisdom stretched like a taut wire, ready to snap. Every person in courtroom 4B seemed frozen in time, processing the profound truth that had just emerged from the mouth of a 3-year-old. The weight of her words, simple, honest, devastating, hung in the air like a sentence waiting to be pronounced. Then, like a dam bursting under unbearable pressure, David Martinez began to crack. It started as a tremor in his hands, barely visible as they gripped the edge of the defendant's table. His breathing became shallow, rapid, as if the oxygen in the room had suddenly thinned. Defense attorney Robert Hayes noticed the change immediately, his experienced eye recognizing the signs of a client about to do something irreversibly damaging to his case. But before Hayes could intervene, before he could whisper warnings or call for a recess, David Martinez did something that would change the trajectory of this case forever. He stood up. The movement was so sudden, so unexpected, that his chair scraped loudly against the floor, the harsh sound echoing through the silent courtroom like a gunshot. Every head turned toward him, every eye focused on the man who had been sitting rigidly composed just moments before. David's face had transformed, the careful mask of innocence he had worn throughout months of legal proceedings had completely dissolved, revealing raw anguish underneath. "Stop," he whispered, his voice barely audible but carrying clearly in the hushed space. Then, louder, with increasing desperation, "Stop. Just ... please ... Judge Williams immediately reached for her gavel, ready to restore order, but something in David's voice made her pause. This wasn't defiance or disruption. This was the sound of a man's soul breaking apart. His shoulders began to shake as tears streamed down his face, and when he looked toward Emma, still sitting peacefully beside Bruno, his expression was one of absolute devastation. "Emma, baby?" David's voice cracked as he spoke to his daughter. "For the first time since the proceedings began, Daddy is so sorry. I did hurt Mommy, and I scared you. And I..." His words dissolved into sobs that came from somewhere deep and primal, a place where legal strategies and self-preservation couldn't reach. Defense attorney Hayes shot to his feet, panic flashing across his features. "Your Honor, I need to confer with my client immediately. I request an immediate recess to..." "No," David said firmly, pushing past his attorney's restraining hand. The word came out with surprising strength, cutting through Hayes' protests like a blade. "She's right. Every single word. Emma, my precious little girl, you're absolutely right." The courtroom erupted in barely contained chaos. Reporters frantically scribbled notes, recognizing that they were witnessing legal history in the making. Prosecutor Jennifer Kim sat stunned, her carefully prepared cross-examination rendered suddenly unnecessary. This wasn't how domestic violence cases typically unfolded. Defendants didn't usually confess in open court after being emotionally destroyed by their own children's testimony. Emma, still sitting cross-legged beside Bruno, looked up at her father with confusion written across her small features. The anger and fear she had spoken about were absent from her expression now, replaced by the unconditional love that only a child can maintain, even in the face of incomprehensible adult behavior. "Daddy, you're not crying happy tears like..." "At my birthday," she observed with heartbreaking innocence, her head tilted to one side as she studied his face. "Are you sad because you used scary touches instead of gentle touches?" The question hit David like a physical blow. He doubled over slightly, gripping the table for support as another wave of sobs racked his frame. "Yes, baby. Yes, Daddy used very scary touches, and that was wrong. So wrong." Rosa Martinez watched from the gallery, her own tears flowing freely as she witnessed her estranged husband's complete emotional collapse. Part of her felt vindicated. Finally, he was acknowledging what he had done to their family. But another part, the part that had loved this man enough to marry him and build a life together, felt only sadness for the destruction of everything they had once been. Emma's next words would prove to be the final catalyst in David's transformation. Looking at her father, with those enormous brown eyes that mirrored his own, she said with the matter-of-fact tone that only 3-year-olds can master, "Daddy, when I do something wrong, I say sorry and try to fix it. Mrs. Rodriguez says that's how we make things better. Can you try to fix the scary touches?" David collapsed back into his chair, his face buried in his hands as he struggled to compose himself enough to speak. When he finally looked up, his eyes were red-rimmed but clear, as if Emma's simple wisdom had burned away years of denial and self-deception. "Emma," he said, his voice hoarse but steady, "Daddy did very bad things. Things that hurt Mommy and scared you. And I can't take them back. But you're right. I need to say sorry and try to fix what I broke." He turned to face Judge Williams, his posture completely different from the defiant defendant who had entered the courtroom that morning. "Your Honor, I want to change my plea. I'm guilty. Guilty of everything in the charges. I hurt my wife. I terrorized my daughter. And I've been lying to myself and everyone else about it." The courtroom exploded into activity. Hayes frantically tried to silence his client. Judge Williams called for order, and reporters rushed to get the story out to the newsrooms. But through it all, Emma continued to sit peacefully beside Bruno, seemingly unaware that her innocent honesty had just accomplished something that months of legal maneuvering couldn't achieve. "I am a monster," David continued, his voice gaining strength as he finally spoke his truth. "Just like Emma said, I became something scary, something that hurt the people I love most in the world. And the worst part is that my beautiful, brave little girl had to be the one to make me see it." He looked directly at Emma, who was watching him with the intense curiosity of a child trying to understand adult emotions. "Baby, can you forgive Daddy? Not for what I did. That was unforgivable. But for taking so long to admit that you were right. You are right about everything." Emma considered this question with the seriousness it deserved, her small hand resting on Bruno's back as if drawing wisdom from their connection. Finally, she smiled, not with fear or uncertainty, but with the radiant hope that had somehow survived everything she had endured. "Daddy, I think you just found the nice daddy that was hiding inside the monster," she said simply. "Now we can start working on the gentle touches, right, Bruno?" And for the first time in months, David Martinez smiled through his tears, realizing that his daughter's forgiveness was both more than he deserved, and exactly what he needed to begin the long journey toward redemption. Within 30 minutes of David Martinez's shocking confession, the story had exploded across social media like wildfire in dry brush. KTVU Channel 2 reporter Maria Gonzalez, who had arrived that morning expecting to cover routine domestic violence, hearing, found herself broadcasting live from the courthouse steps with the biggest story of her 10-year career. Her hands trembled slightly as she held the microphone, still processing what she had witnessed in courtroom 4B. This is Maria Gonzalez reporting from Riverside County Courthouse, where we've just witnessed something unprecedented in American legal history, she began, her professional composure barely containing her excitement. A 3-year-old girl's conversation with a therapy dog has just led to a full confession in a major domestic violence case, and the implications are already reverberating far beyond these courthouse walls. Her Facebook Live broadcast, hastily arranged in the courthouse parking lot, began with just her news director watching. But within minutes, the viewer count started climbing. 100, 500, 1,000. By the time she finished her initial report, 15,000 people were watching live, and the numbers kept skyrocketing. Comments poured in faster than anyone could read them, creating a digital avalanche of reactions from viewers across the country. My daughter was Emma's age when she witnessed her father's violence, wrote Sarah Chun from Portland. If only there had been a Bruno to help her speak her truth. The comment received 347 likes in the first hour, sparking a thread of similar stories that stretched for pages. Inside the courthouse, Judge Patricia Williams had called an emergency recess to process the unprecedented events. Her chambers, normally a quiet sanctuary for legal contemplation, had become the epicenter of a media storm. Her phone rang constantly, reporters from CNN, NBC, and the Washington Post all demanding interviews about the therapy dog case that was already trending on Twitter with hashtag EMMA. Voice. Dr. Amanda Rodriguez, a child trauma specialist from UC Riverside, was one of the first experts to reach out. Your Honor, she said during an urgent phone call, what happened in your courtroom today represents a breakthrough in trauma-informed justice. We need to document every aspect of this case. It could revolutionize how we handle child witnesses nationwide. Meanwhile, Detective Sarah Chun found herself fielding calls from law enforcement agencies across California and beyond. Captain Rodriguez from San Diego County Sheriff's Department was the first. Chun, we need details on your therapy dog program. After seeing the news coverage, we have 3 judges demanding to know how quickly we can implement something similar. The ripple effects spread far beyond professional circles. At Riverside Elementary School, where Emma attended preschool, teacher Mrs. Rodriguez gathered her colleagues during lunch break to watch the news coverage on her phone. That's our Emma, she whispered, tears streaming down her face. That brave little girl who draws pictures of rainbows after storms. She just changed everything for children like her. The school's principal, Dr. Michael Thompson, immediately called an emergency meeting with the district's counseling staff. We need to prepare, he announced to the assembled team. If this story goes as viral as I think it will, we're going to have parents asking questions, children sharing their own experiences, and media attention we've never dealt with before. By 3 p.m., hashtag EMMS Voice had been shared over 250,000 times on social media platforms. But more significantly, the hashtag was becoming a rallying cry for domestic violence survivors who had never found their own voice. The National Domestic Violence Hotline reported a 400% increase in calls that afternoon, with many callers specifically mentioning Emma's story as their motivation to finally seek help. Jennifer Martinez, no relation to Emma's family, from Phoenix, posted a video that quickly went viral. I'm 34 years old, and it took a 3-year-old to give me the courage to leave my abusive husband. If Emma can speak her truth to a courtroom full of strangers, I can finally speak mine to the people who love me. The legal community was equally electric with discussion. Harvard law professor Dr. Sarah Kim posted an analysis thread on Twitter that was retweeted by thousands of legal professionals. The Martinez case demonstrates something law schools don't teach, that pure truth, delivered without legal strategy or manipulation, remains the most powerful force in any courtroom. Law enforcement agencies nationwide began scrambling to understand the courthouse therapy dog model. By 5 p.m., Detective Chun had received calls from departments in Texas, Florida, New York, and Washington State, all demanding immediate information about training protocols and implementation timelines. But perhaps the most powerful response came from an unexpected source. At 4:30 p.m., a 911 call came into Riverside County Dispatch from a woman named Linda Torres. I've been watching the news about that little girl, she told the operator, her voice shaking. My own daughter is 5, and she's been drawing pictures. Like Emma's, my husband. He hurt me last night, and I've been too scared to call. But if a 3-year-old can be brave enough to speak up, then so can I. The story reached national news by evening. CNN's Anderson Cooper opened his show with Emma's story, calling it a moment when innocence met injustice and changed everything. The segment featured an interview with Dr. Patricia Williams, a child psychologist who had consulted on the courthouse therapy dog program. What we witnessed today, Dr. Williams explained to Cooper's millions of viewers, was the power of creating a safe space for truth to emerge. Bruno didn't just comfort Emma, he provided her with a non-judgmental recipient for her honesty. When children feel truly safe, they can accomplish extraordinary things. The economic impact began almost immediately. PetSmart's stock price jumped 3% after CEO Brian Cornell announced on CNBC that the company would donate $2 million to expand courthouse therapy dog programs nationwide. Emma's story shows us that sometimes the most important public servants have 4 legs and a wagging tail, Cornell stated. By midnight, the story had been covered by major news outlets in 47 countries. The BBC ran it as their lead international story, while newspapers in Japan, Australia, and Germany featured Emma's photo on their front pages. A 3-year-old's conversation with a therapy dog in a small California courthouse had somehow become a global symbol of courage, truth, and the power of innocent honesty to change the world. But the most significant impact was yet to come. In living rooms across America, parents were having difficult conversations with their children. Survivors were finding courage to speak up, and legislators were already drafting bills to mandate therapy dog programs in family courts. Emma Martinez had no idea that her simple conversation with Bruno had just launched a movement that would transform the American justice system forever. The revolution had begun, one honest word at a time. The January morning sun streamed through the windows of Dr. Lisa Chun's therapy office, casting warm patterns across the colorful play area where Emma Martinez was carefully arranging toy animals in what she called her safety circle. 6 months had passed since that pivotal day in courtroom 4B, and the transformation in this almost 4-year-old was nothing short of remarkable. Gone was the terrified little girl who had clutched Mr. Whiskers like a lifeline. In her place sat a confident child who spoke about her feelings with wisdom that amazed the adults around her. "Dr. Lisa, look," Emma announced proudly, holding up her latest drawing. "I drew Bruno helping another scared kid. See, the little boy is crying, but Bruno is there, so he's getting braver." The artwork showed a clear evolution from the dark, chaotic scribbles she had created immediately after the court proceedings. Now her drawings featured bright colors, smiling faces, and themes of protection and hope. Dr. Chun smiled as she examined the picture, noting the sophisticated emotional processing it represented. "Emma, can you tell me what Bruno is saying to the scared boy?" Emma considered this seriously, her small finger tracing Bruno's familiar form on the paper. "I think he's saying, it's okay to tell the truth, even when it's scary. Brave kids help other people be safe." Her voice carried the matter-of-fact tone she had developed when discussing difficult topics, a sign of healthy emotional integration that impressed every professional who worked with her. Across town, Rosa Martinez was experiencing her own transformation. The small apartment she shared with Emma had become a sanctuary of healing, decorated with Emma's artwork and photographs from their new life. Rosa had enrolled in evening classes at Riverside Community College, working toward her certification as a victim's advocate, a career path inspired directly by her daughter's courage in speaking truth to power. "Mommy, is today a daddy day?" Emma asked as Rosa helped her into her winter coat. The supervised visits with David had become a cornerstone of Emma's healing process, carefully structured interactions that allowed father and daughter to rebuild their relationship on a foundation of honesty and accountability. "Yes, sweetheart," Rosa replied, brushing Emma's hair into neat pigtails. "Remember what we talked about? Daddy is working very hard to learn gentle touches and quiet voices. He's practicing every day, just like you practice your letters. The drive to the family visitation center took them past the courthouse where everything had changed. Emma always looked for Bruno when they passed, waving enthusiastically at the building as if the therapy dog might see her through the windows. "Bye, Bruno. Thanks for helping me be brave," she would call out, her voice filled with genuine affection, for the furry friend who had given her the courage to change her family's story. At the visitation center, David Martinez waited nervously in the cheerfully decorated meeting room. The man who had once terrorized his family was barely recognizable. 26 weeks of intensive domestic violence intervention had stripped away the anger and defensiveness, replacing them with genuine remorse and a desperate desire to earn back even a fraction of his daughter's trust. "Daddy!" Emma burst through the door with the enthusiasm only children can muster, running straight into arms that had learned to be gentle, careful, safe. David's eyes filled with tears, as they did during every visit. Not tears of self-pity, but of gratitude that this remarkable little girl still saw something worth loving in him. "Hi, my brave princess," David whispered, holding her with the reverence of someone who knew how close he had come to losing everything precious in his life. "Did you bring me new pictures today?" Emma nodded eagerly, pulling out a folder of her recent artwork. Each drawing told a story of healing, houses with all family members smiling, rainbows after storms, and repeatedly, images of a large dog helping small children find their voices. "This one is you learning gentle hugs," she explained, showing him a picture of two stick figures embracing with hearts floating around them. The supervised visits had become a laboratory for rebuilding trust. David had learned to follow Emma's lead, to let her set the pace of their reconnection. When she wanted to teach him her preschool songs, he sang along with enthusiasm. When she needed to talk about the scary time, he listened without defensiveness, validating her feelings and taking full responsibility for his actions. "Emma," David said carefully during this particular visit, using the therapeutic language he had learned in his mandated counseling sessions, "can you help Daddy understand how you felt when you talked to Bruno that day?" Emma tilted her head, considering the question with her characteristic seriousness. "I felt scared of the big room and all the grown-ups," she began slowly. "But Bruno made me feel safe. Like when you're scared of thunder, but then you get under a warm blanket, and it's not so scary anymore." She paused, studying her father's face with those perceptive brown eyes. "Daddy, are you still learning to not be the monster?" The question, delivered with innocent directness, hit David like it did every time she asked it. "Yes, baby girl. Every single day, I work very hard to remember how to be the good daddy, the safe daddy. And when I feel angry feelings starting, I use my breathing exercises and my quiet voice, just like you learned in school." Emma nodded approvingly. "Good. Mrs. Rodriguez says practice makes progress, not perfect. So you can keep practicing, and I'll help you remember the gentle touches." Their visits had become a masterclass in redemption and forgiveness. Emma's natural resilience, combined with excellent therapeutic support, had allowed her to maintain her loving relationship with her father, while clearly understanding that his previous behavior was unacceptable. She had become, in many ways, his teacher in the art of healthy relationships. As the visit ended, Emma hugged her father goodbye with genuine affection. "Daddy, do you know what I told Bruno yesterday when Mommy took me to see him?" "What did you tell him, sweetheart?" "I told him that sometimes broken things can be fixed if everyone works really hard and uses lots of love. And I think our family is getting fixed, piece by piece." David watched through the window as Rosa and Emma drove away, his heart simultaneously breaking and healing at his daughter's profound wisdom. In just 6 months, she had taught him more about forgiveness, accountability, and genuine change than 26 weeks of professional counseling ever could. The healing wasn't complete. It might never be complete, but it was real. honest, and built on the unshakable foundation of a brave little girl's determination to help her family find their way back to love. 1 year to the day after Emma Martinez first whispered her truth to Officer Bruno, the grand ballroom of the Riverside Convention Center buzzed with energy unlike anything the venue had ever hosted. Over 800 people had gathered for the official launch of Emma's Voice, a statewide initiative that would fundamentally transform how California's family courts approached cases involving child witnesses. The audience represented an unprecedented coalition: judges, attorneys, law enforcement officers, child psychologists, domestic violence advocates, and dozens of families whose lives had been touched by the revolutionary therapy dog program. At the head table, 4-year-old Emma Martinez sat between Judge Patricia Williams and Detective Sarah Chun, her legs swinging freely from the adult-sized chair, completely unaware that she was the guest of honor at what many legal experts were calling the most significant reform in family court history. She wore a bright yellow dress decorated with butterflies, her favorite, and had insisted on bringing Mr. Whiskers for moral support, though the worn stuffed rabbit seemed less necessary now than it had a year ago. Officer Bruno lay calmly beside her chair, wearing a special ceremonial vest embroidered with honorary co-founder Emma's Voice program. His presence anchored the event just as it had anchored Emma's courage that pivotal day in courtroom 4B. Every few minutes, Emma would lean down to whisper something in his ear, their bond as strong as ever, a living symbol of the program's core: philosophy. "Ladies and gentlemen," Judge Williams began, her voice carrying across the packed ballroom. "When I walked into my courtroom that July morning, I had no idea I was about to witness the beginning of a revolution. Today, we celebrate not just the launch of a program, but the triumph of courage over fear, truth over silence, and hope over despair." The statistics that followed were staggering. In the 12 months since Emma's testimony, California had implemented therapy dog programs in 47 family courts across the state. Over 1,200 child witnesses had been assisted by trained therapy dogs, resulting in a 73% increase in successful testimonies and a 45% reduction in trauma markers. During legal proceedings, the program had facilitated 89 plea agreements in domestic violence cases, as defendants faced the undeniable truth delivered through children's honest voices. But numbers couldn't capture the human stories that had emerged from Emma's legacy. In the audience sat Marcus Johnson, age 6, who had found the courage to testify about his stepfather's abuse after meeting Bella, a golden retriever trained through the Emma's Voice program. Beside him, his mother Sarah wiped away tears as she remembered the day her son finally felt safe enough to speak his truth. "Therapy dogs don't just comfort children," explained Dr. Amanda Rodriguez, the child trauma specialist who had become the program's chief psychological consultant. "They create a bridge between the child's need for safety and the legal system's need for truth." Emma showed us that when children feel truly protected, they can accomplish extraordinary things. The ripple effects had spread far beyond California's borders. Governor Michelle Lujan Grisham of New Mexico had signed legislation mandating therapy dog programs in all family courts by 2025. Texas, Florida, and New York had allocated combined funding of $15.7 million for similar initiatives. The European Union had sent a delegation to study the program, and implementation pilots were already underway in the United Kingdom, Canada, and Australia. Emma, oblivious to the international attention her story had generated, raised her small hand when Judge Williams asked if she wanted to say something to the audience. The massive ballroom fell silent as she was helped to the microphone, her voice clear and confident in a way that would have been unimaginable just 12 months earlier. "Hi everyone," she began, her 4-year-old lisp adding charm to her words. "I want to tell all the scared kids that Bruno and his doggy friends are here to help you not be scared anymore. And grown-ups listen better when you talk to doggies, so it's like having a best friend who helps you be brave. The audience erupted in applause, but Emma wasn't finished. I learned that telling the truth is really important, even when it's scary. My daddy did scary things, but he's learning to do better now because I told the truth to Bruno. So if you have scary things to tell, find a doggy friend like Bruno, and they'll help you. As cameras flashed and the standing ovation continued, Emma leaned down to Bruno and whispered loudly enough for the microphone to catch. "Did we do good, Bruno? I think we helped lots of kids today." The formal presentations that followed painted a picture of systemic transformation. Chief Justice Patricia Guerrero of the California Supreme Court announced via video message that the state would invest $8.2 million annually in expanding the program. The National Center for State Courts had designated Emma's Voice as a model program for nationwide implementation. Perhaps most significantly, Congress had introduced the Emma Martinez Child Witness Protection Act, bipartisan legislation that would provide federal funding for therapy dog programs in family courts across all 50 states. Senator Dianne Feinstein, speaking via video link, called Emma a young hero whose courage continues to protect children she's never met. As the evening wound down, Emma found herself surrounded by other children whose lives had been touched by the program she had unknowingly launched. 7-year-old Sophia from San Diego told her about Max, the Labrador who had helped her speak, about her uncle's inappropriate touching. 5-year-old Tyler from Sacramento described how Luna, a therapy spaniel, had given him courage to tell a judge about his mother's boyfriend's violence. "Emma," Sophia said with the seriousness only children can possess, "you started something really big. My mommy says you're a hero." Emma considered this gravely, then smiled with characteristic wisdom. "I think Bruno is the real hero. I just talk to him like a friend. Sometimes that's all you need, a really good friend who listens." The evening's final moment came when Dr. Michael Thompson, now director of the statewide Emma's Voice program, presented the first annual Courage Award to a surprised Emma. The crystal sculpture, engraved with paw prints in scales of justice, would be given each year to a child witness who demonstrated exceptional bravery in speaking their truth. As families began to leave, many stopping to take pictures with Emma and Bruno, Rosa Martinez watched her daughter with profound pride. The terrified 3-year-old who had hidden in closets during her parents' fights had become a symbol of hope for traumatized children everywhere. But more importantly, she had remained fundamentally herself, curious, loving, wise beyond her years, and absolutely certain that truth and kindness could fix almost anything. The last image of the evening showed Emma walking hand in hand with her parents toward the exit, her family finally whole again through the power of honesty, accountability, and healing. Bruno walked beside them, his tail wagging gently, still, the protector who had helped one small voice change the world. As they stepped into the warm California night, Emma looked up at the stars and made a wish that every scared child would find their own Bruno, their own voice, their own courage, to speak truth that could set them free. Her legacy was already making that wish come true, one honest conversation at a time.